I'm Hello Ego with EDMProd, and today I'm going to show you how to learn any synth in minutes. How is this even possible? There's so many different types of synths out there, they all look so different. Well, the good news is that even though the user interface of every synth might be very different looking, most synths utilize all of the same components. By understanding what all these different components are and what their role in synthesis is, you're going to be able to understand any synth you look at like that. Today we're going to be using Vital to go over all of this. And Vital is a free synth and it's really awesome and fully featured. And if you head over to the free downloads vault on EDMProd.com, we've actually got a pack of free Vital presets there for you. You can download those and that'll help get you started. So let's say you just downloaded Vital, you're taking a look at it and you're wondering, how do I even go about this? Where do I start? As I mentioned, most synths use a lot of the same components. There are really 5 main components of a synth. There's the oscillator, the filter, the amplifier, envelopes, and LFOs. So let's dive on in and start by talking about what each of these different components of the synth actually do. An oscillator is what makes the sound. So if I play a key on my keyboard here, we hear a sine wave. The sine wave is being generated by this oscillator up here at the top, oscillator 1. And oscillators can generate a variety of sound, but almost any synth has the ability to generate at least a few of the basic waveforms. Those basic waveforms are the sine wave, which is what we're hearing right now. The sine wave is the most simple of all the tones. It contains the fewest harmonics. If you look down here at the spectrum, when I play a note, all we see is one big peak here. That's just one harmonic. That's the fundamental frequency. Moving up from that, we have the triangle wave. Now, a triangle wave is a little bit more complex. There's going to be some more overtones, some more harmonics to the sound. This sounds a little bit brighter. That brightness is caused from these peaks that we're seeing right here. Next, we have the saw wave. And a saw wave is going to be a very bright tone. You can see the saw wave is somewhat similar to a triangle wave, except these upper harmonics, there's a lot more of them, and they are a little bit louder. Next, we have the square wave. A square wave and a saw wave are pretty similar, except that the square wave only contains every other harmonic. It contains only the odd ones. We have 1, 3, 5, 7, and so on. It has a slightly more hollow sound to it, but it's still a very, very bright waveform. So these waveforms are the basic shapes you're going to encounter in most synths. Some will be more limited. For example, the TB303 only offers a saw wave or a square wave, and many will be much more complex, offering a variety of extended waveforms and wave tables. Today, we're going to keep it simple and just talk about these main basic wave shapes. Okay, so now we understand how a synth makes sound, but where does it go from there? What happens after the sound is generated? Here we have to start diving into a little bit of the signal flow of a synth. Generally, the output of the oscillator will run into a filter of sorts, and then from the filter to the amplifier. So let's talk about a filter. The purpose of a filter is to cut or boost various frequencies that the oscillator provides. On Vital, you turn your filters on down here. The control that I'm moving here is called the cutoff. This is the point at which the filter starts to cut frequencies. As I move the cutoff down, you'll see that the upper end frequencies start to decrease. This particular type of synthesis is known as subtractive synthesis, where you start with a very harmonically rich waveform, like a triangle wave, saw wave, or square wave, and you use a filter to subtract frequencies from that sound to get the tone that you want. Most filters will have 2 main parameters, the cutoff and the resonance. And you can see as I move the resonance up or down here, what I'm doing is I'm creating a volume boost at the cutoff point. Let's give this a high resonance and take a look at my spectrum down here. As I play the note and move the cutoff around, you're going to see an increase in volume at the point where the filter is attenuating frequencies. It adds a little bit of extra tone to the sound and kind of makes it cooler. You can kind of get some really neat squelchy sounds by increasing the resonance. Now this is just one type of filter. This is what's called a low pass because it allows the low frequencies to pass through. But there's a few other types of filters that you're going to encounter as well. For example, here's the high pass filter. As the name suggests, the high pass filter is going to allow high frequencies to pass through and cut the lows. We also have a band pass. A band pass cuts the lows and the highs, and just allows the area right around the cutoff to come through. Another common filter type is a notch, and a notch is sort of the opposite of a bandpass, whereas the bandpass allows only the frequencies that are around the cutoff point to come through. The notch will cut the frequencies at the cutoff point and allow everything around it to pass through. And last we have the peak filter, and what a peak filter does is it allows all of the harmonics through, but it just boosts the area right around the cutoff point. This allows you to get that resonant, squelchy filter sound without actually cutting any of the other frequencies. Another important aspect of filters is the steepness of the cutoff. Earlier I was playing around with this low pass filter, and up here it says 12 decibels. And you're going to see this on a lot of synths. We have a few options. There's 12 decibels or 24 decibels. You can sort of see what's happening when I switch between the two of them. 24 decibels gives us a steeper cutoff. So what this means is that past the cutoff point, the filter is going to attenuate or decrease the volume of the sound by 12 decibels for every octave. So 1 octave above the cutoff point, it's going to be 12 decibels quieter. 2 octaves above the cutoff point, it'll be 24 decibels quieter. However, if I switch this to 24 decibels, 1 octave above the cutoff point will be 24 decibels quieter, and 2 octaves will be 48 decibels quieter. So it decreases the volume much more quickly. Alright, so we've got our oscillator running into our filter, and then as I mentioned earlier, after the filter, the sound runs into the amplifier. And the amplifier is basically just the output volume of the synth. Amplifiers are controlled by envelopes. You can think of an envelope basically as just like a little helping hand that's turning the volume of the synth up or down. In most synths, envelope 1 is already pre-hardwired to control the amplifier. Most envelopes you see will be an ADSR envelope, which stands for attack, decay, sustain, and release. So we have 4 main stages of our envelope. An envelope is going to start working as soon as you press a key. Vital's got a really nice display here where it actually shows you the path the envelope is taking. The attack stage is the first stage of the envelope. This is how long it takes the synth to go from silent up to the full volume. So you can hear when I press the key, the note fades in because I have a longer attack time. After the attack stage is completed, the synth goes into the decay stage. The decay is how long it takes the synth to go from peak volume down to the sustain stage. So you can see this little bead of light traveling along the attack and then down to the sustain. Sustain is the only component of the ADSR that does not have a time element to it. What that means is that as long as you're holding the key down, the synth will sit at the sustain level. Once you release the key, the synth then enters the release stage. And the release is just how long it takes the synth to go from the sustain volume back down to silent again. So if you want a sound that's got a little bit of a tail to it, you're going to increase the release stage. The envelope allows us to shape our sound in a bunch of different ways. So now if I want to make a bit of a pluck sound, what I'm going to do is lower the sustain all the way, probably going to decrease the decay time so we have a bit of a faster decay, and turn the attack all the way down. So we're going to have an instantaneous attack, a pretty quick decay, and a sustain phase that is silent. Notice when I release the key when the sustain's all the way down, the release stage isn't really doing very much because the synth is already at silence. If I want to create more of like a pad type sound, usually those are going to have a longer attack, a higher sustain, and a pretty long release. So now what I can do is I can hold this down and it's going to stay sustaining the entire time I'm holding it. Envelopes are not just for volume though. You can actually assign an envelope to most other parameters in a lot of synths. Lots of times you're going to see that the filter also has its own dedicated envelope. This is not preset here in Vital, but in order to assign it, all I have to do is hover over this envelope 2, click where I get this little crosshair, and drag it onto the cutoff. I can use this wheel to assign how much of this envelope is being applied to the filter. And if I give it a little attack and pull the sustain down, we're going to now see this filter open up through an attack stage and then close back down through a decay before it finally holds down at the sustain. By combining the amplitude and the filter envelopes, we can start to really shape our sound and get a variety of different tones. The envelope is one of 2 main modulation sources you're going to find in most synths. The other main one is the LFO. LFO stands for Low Frequency Oscillator. Like envelopes, LFOs can be assigned to a number of parameters. It really depends on the synth, whether there are some limitations or whether it can basically be assigned to anything in the synth. In Vital, you can assign it to almost any parameter in here, but other synths are a little bit more hardwired. Let's just go ahead and assign it to our filter cutoff again. And now when I play and hold a note, you're going to see this LFO open the filter up, close it back down, and then keep repeating that. Just like the sound producing oscillator in a synth, the LFO will often come in a few basic shapes: your sine wave, square wave, triangle wave, and saw wave. And you can change the rate of the LFO just simply by increasing this little tempo section right here. So if I want to increase or decrease the rate of the LFO, all I have to do is drag up or down right here. Vital defaults to having the LFOs synced to your project tempo, but you also usually have the option to have it set to seconds or milliseconds. In which case it's more of a free running type oscillator and it won't sync to your project tempo. So that's basically it. Pretty easy, right? You have your oscillator into your filter, filter into the amplifier. The amplifier is controlled by the envelope, and the LFOs can control a variety of parameters in the synth to give it some more shape and tone. So now that we understand this in Vital, let's take a look at a couple other synths and try to apply this knowledge in the same way. What we're looking at here is Ableton's Analog. Analog is one of the most basic synths in Ableton, so it's a really good place for us to start. Just by taking a quick look at this synth, we can already see some of the things we're now familiar with. We have your oscillator, your filter, and your amplifier. And then over here are the LFOs. I'm going to turn off oscillator 2 for right now, and we're going to focus on just this one chain at the top. Here we have oscillator 1. Its current shape is a saw wave, but we can also change it to sine wave, square wave, or a noise signal. Noise is just random voltage. You're going to find that in a lot of synths as well, but not always. Here we have an octave control, so if I wanted to play an octave up or an octave down, I could just move that up or down. And here we have a semitone control, which will move it up by 1 semitone. And then we also have detune, which will allow us to detune the synth by a number of cents. From here, we move over to the filter section. Now, as I mentioned before, some filters are going to have their own envelope that is just preset to work with the filter. And that is the case in here. When we click the tab to look at the filter, we see this ADSR envelope in here. So I'm going to go ahead and pull the cutoff down, and then I'm going to turn the resonance up. We can already hear the envelope opening and closing the filter. Do you hear that kind of like meow, meow? That is a high resonant filter that is closing down to this filter frequency right here. Analog already comes by default with the envelope controlling the filter a little bit. But not all synths do this. And if you're wondering how you can get this envelope to control the filter, usually there's going to be a modulation section here. And underneath here you can see various modulation sources. Here is the envelope. We can see it's already set to 4. If I want to increase the amount that this envelope is controlling the filter cutoff, all I have to do is drag this up. can drag the sustain all the way down to get a bit of a plucky sound. Opening up the tab next to filter, we can see we've got a few options in here. A 12 decibel per octave low pass and a 24 decibel per octave. A 6 decibel per octave band pass or a 12. Then we have 2 notch options, 2 high pass options, and then a little extra formant filter, which kind of gives you some more vowel-like sounds. You can hear that sounds like a voice going ow, wow, wow. Not all filters come with that though. Moving on from the filter, we have our amplifier. Here is your amplitude envelope, like we mentioned before. Works the exact same as the one in Vital. You can actually click and drag these points around to create whatever sound you want. Moving on from here, we have the LFOs. Now I'm going to activate LFO 1. So we've activated the LFO, but we need to now assign it to something. I'm going to assign it to the amplifier. So here I need to look for the modulation section. And we can see, look, level mod LFO 1. All we have to do is increase this, and now this LFO will start to modulate the level of the synth. And as I mentioned before, we can either have this set to hertz, or time mode, or we can have it set to a particular subdivision of the beat based on your project tempo. Let's move back over to Vital, and we're going to talk about one last component of synths that is a pretty common feature in most synths, and that would be the effect section. Many synths are going to come with reverbs, delays, some distortion perhaps. In terms of signal flow, where the effects fit in that chain is the sound is created by the oscillator, goes to the effects section. The output of the effects section goes into the filter, and then the filter to the amplifier. So if we add some reverb, so I'm going to unassign this LFO just by double clicking the little circle, and I'm going to pull this filter all the way down. So notice how we don't really hear much of that reverbed sound. That's because it's being reverbed and then filtered. Could add a little distortion to it. We also have another filter in here, and this is very useful in case you want to filter the sound before you apply the effects. So for example, I'm going to turn this filter off. Go back over to the effects, and then to arrange this, I'm just going to drag my filter all the way to the top. This means the sound is created by the oscillator, it gets filtered, and then it gets sent through the effects. So notice we can still hear a lot of that reverb when we do it this way. Even though a lot of synths might have all these extended features, if you understand those basic components of oscillator, filter, amplifier, LFOs and modulators, and maybe effects if your synth has it, then you're going to be able to get started with any synth no matter what.